All right, guys, we are moving through pretty nicely, so we're going to get into this. Welcome to the Healthy Humans Podcast. My name is Nathan, and I'm going to be your host today. I'm your host every time we do this because this is a one-man podcast, one-man show, editor, producer, all that fun stuff. We're going to get right into it today. You are in episode 14. This is officially the 8th episode of season 2. So far, we've covered a lot of different episodes here, guys, so make sure you guys take a look at our back catalog of episodes so you guys can catch up on everything we've gone over so far. If you are tuning into us right now, you are catching me on Finley the Dog Gaming Live, which we do this on Twitch. So very happy you guys are going to hear. This is where I stream a portion of my content, which includes gaming content and the Healthy Humans Podcast itself. So that way I have a live forum to get your guys' question in so we can go all through that and just have a really good time. I'm really happy to everyone who tunes in. Just a huge thank you, guys, to everyone who listens. That goes so far into really putting like some fire into me and making sure that I am staying motivated, because this is a lot of work and I really want to make sure you guys get the most out of this podcast. So that being said, make sure you guys are listening to all of the videos so far, leaving comments, questions. Questions are going to be big, your personal experiences. I want to hear from you guys so that way we can continue making this thing better every single week. That is the whole plan. If you guys are listening right now, follow the channel. If you say that out loud, people actually tend to do that. They're like, yeah, I will do that. That actually works. It's kind of like the YouTubers' dread is, especially when you ask people to follow and subscribe and like your videos. Most of the time, people won't do that if you don't specifically ask them to, and we hate doing it, but statistics show that when you say those words, that you get more out of your engagement, essentially. Remember, guys, the purpose of this podcast is to bring education to everyone, especially in my online community, which most of you are gamers, streamers, content creators. And I really just want to make sure you guys get the most amount of information about health, fitness, nutrition, overall wellness. We'll do some mental health episodes as well, because that's very, very important in this growing world. Personal health and well-being is more important than ever. If you guys end up missing the live version of this on Twitch, make sure you guys are subscribed to me on YouTube. That's going to be over there. So we'll have the audio version available in podcast, video over on YouTube, and on the right side of the screen here, guys, you can see all of the different platforms we are already located on. Let's get right into it here today, guys. Today we are talking about the carry. This is our last of the fundamental movements, so we're going to be covering this one in depth and some associated movements as well. When I'm training my clients on this pillar of our foundations, often it is very simple in its prescription. Grab a weight, determine your loading pattern, and start walking. Very, very simple, but incredibly energy intensive, and it's in its demand. So I'm very, very excited to talk about this today so that I can get you guys a really, really good movement you guys can put into your routine ASAP. The more often I train with this movement, the more movements I added in that would directly supplement a carry. Now, quickly, I did realize that this 6th pillar of movement actually went far beyond that. The carry does a lot of different things, and we're going to talk about that here today. Our thesis for today's episode is we are going to be looking at the carry, its basic and different forms it might take, the benefits of a carry and its associated movements, the importance of stabilization and what I call anti-movement as a core feature of the carry, and how often core stabilization should be paired with this as well. So that's what we're going to be going over today, guys. Let's dive right in. Our first talking point today is going to be just covering basics and form. If you guys have ever heard of a carry, often it's referred to as a farmer's carry. This is a full body movement, and it's super accessible to do because almost anyone can do this with very little modification. That's one of the biggest hurdles when getting into exercise, is people who have pre-existing injuries and orthopedic limitations. It's really hard to get into exercise because, they might have a physical barrier to doing certain exercises. Whereas the carry is one of the most unilateral movements that most people can do. And it's something we do in our daily lives quite a bit as well. So it's very, very applicable to that. The basics to a farmer's carry. So if we back up here really quick here, guys, and we take a look at that slide with our little man here. He's not little, but I always love these diagrams because they're like absolutely shredded, because it's just showing you what muscles are being targeted. But anyways, you can see it's just a standard upright posture, walking gait, weights in both hands. Really, really easy to do here, guys. Again, if you have something heavy, you can literally just grab it, pick it up, and just keep moving. So biggest things you're going to need for this movement here, guys, are a weight. Again, I kind of already went over that a little bit, and a space to actually move around. So if you have a track, a neighborhood loop you can do this on, or on a treadmill. I will say, And you'll note that there's a little blast dot on here says, don't be an idiot. That is very, very important. And I say this because I see people do dumb things on treadmills all the time because I work in a gym. You just see people do dumb stuff. So this is my official, like, don't do dumb stuff warning to you guys. If you are doing a carry on a treadmill, use the little safety poles. A lot of them come with little clips you can attach that to you. So if you get far enough back on the treadmill, it automatically engages the stop feature. That's actually really, really helpful when you have weights in your hands, because then you don't have to worry about like switching hands or like pushing the button with the weight, things like that. So when you're really, really tired, and those more fine skilled like motor tasks aren't as much of a burden. So just make sure you're doing this on low speed. Preferably even a manual treadmill would be really, really helpful, because basically once you stop moving, you're good. But if you're using this on a mechanical treadmill, just be careful and use the safety pole. Really, it comes down to don't be an idiot, and especially don't do this backwards. Not a huge fan of people doing that, but people do silly things all the time. Let's get right into our first joint check here, guys. So when you guys are going through the carry, again, we've done joint checks before where there's like 17 different things, and you might be thinking, Nathan, there is way too much to check here. When you're doing a joint check for the carry, it's very, very simple. You want to check 3 different areas. First one, we're going to talk about the upper spine. So you want to make sure those shoulder blades are pulled together. So if you find that your shoulders are rounding forward, no good. Pull those shoulder blades back. You're going to have a good time. Next is you want to make sure your core is engaged. You don't want to let that spine round forward. That's no good. You want to make sure that you're nice and upright the entire time. Engage that core, engage those glutes. You're going to have a good time. And then the third thing is just walk in a straight line. If you're doing this around a track, just make sure you're sticking to a semi-normal path. Again, you're going to be taking some curves, which is actually really, really good. And I would say if you are doing this on a track, make sure you do a couple of different laps both directions, so that way you're practicing going around both corners and kind of making sure you're not favoring one leg or the other. Again, this is a really, really simple movement here, guys, but it's something that is absolutely going to benefit your routine if you put it in there. So let's make sure we do that together. Next one we're going to go over is just different carry variations. So we've got a little diagram down here. I really struggled to find really good diagrams for this one here today, because some of these moves they're very well known, but there's not as many good diagrams online that I was able to snag, and especially in PNG form as well. So this one unfortunately does have a little bit of a white background. But the first one we're going to talk about is the single side carry. So our figure here is just holding that weight in that right hand. That is a great way to challenge a little bit more of the core, because you're putting all of that weight over to one side. The shoulders want to slump over towards that side, especially if it's a really, really heavy load. And that's good. You want that, but you want to make sure that that core is staying really, really stable. The hips are engaged as well, because if those hips start to tilt one way, that's not a great movement pattern we want to be in. So training with that single side helps prevent that. Really, really good option. And again, just making sure you're putting one foot in front of the other. This can be really, really demanding. The only drawback about this one is usually you're going to use less load. So a lot of the times, if you are using a heavier dumbbell over on one side to compensate, using like a wrist strap or a grip assist of some sort can be really, really helpful. So that way the grip does not fail depending on how far you're going in. So you can add that extra load if you want. The next one we'll talk about is the overhead carry. Now, the overhead carry is really, really simple. You can do this with kettlebells, dumbbells, lots of different weight choices, but it requires a lot more shoulder involvement. We talked a lot in our episode on the push that the shoulder's a very mobile joint, but we want to make sure it has strength as well. So a lot of the times when I tell people to do an overhead carry, I'll usually have them hold their arm up at a 90-degree angle, so that shoulder is still working and that weight is right here. And then I'll have them walk with this, so kind of moving that around so you guys can see. I usually won't have them have it all the way back, but I'll usually have them keep that weight forward. It does require the shoulder to stabilize. A lot of times people will fully extend their arm all the way overhead as well. That is another acceptable variation. They're all really, really demanding, but really the biggest thing that these are doing is not only targeting the shoulders more, but raising that center of mass. This requires a greater stability demand, because now that center of gravity is higher up off the ground. It takes more work to control, and it's really, really good for overall body conditioning. Then I'll talk about the offset carry. Now, the offset carry sometimes gets a little bit confused with the single side carry. An offset carry still requires 2 dumbbells, so one in each hand, but it's the idea that you hold one down by the waist and the other one up at the shoulder. So that way you're creating this little bit of a diagonal line of different pulls in gravity. So this gives a little bit more of a rotational demand for the body. And again, just requires the core to stabilize, but just against different forces. Really, really good for adding that little bit of complexity to your routine. Again, we want to make sure that core is really, really strong. So let's keep that going as well. Next one is rucking. This one is really just depends on what kind of like pack or like weighted vest, things like that. But you can load these up pretty heavy, and a good ruck pack will usually have different adjustments and stuff, so you can change how that load is distributed on your back. Now, this one's really, really popular in a lot of different circles, but really the most important part about this is it doesn't require the hands as much. So usually you can load everything up onto the shoulders, basically just like wearing a weighted backpack. It's a little bit more complicated than that because you want to make sure excuse me, you want to make sure that everything is properly distributed. But this is much better for more like overall endurance events and can kind of keep you going for a little bit longer. Next talking point we're going to talk about, once we get that to transition, there we go, is we're just going to talk about the benefits of the carry as well. This is, for how simple of a movement this is, it is just loaded with different benefits. So I want to go over those with you guys here. So first benefit is that core stability. If you don't have good core stability, you can't effectively carry a weight. It's very, very easily going to cause injury, and we don't want that. So we want to make sure that core is just super tight the entire time. Next one's pretty obvious. It's hand strength. And this is usually what you will notice getting fatigued first, because most people don't work their forearms. A lot of times I will see people in the gym doing things like wrist curls and wrist extensions and things like that. I think this is a much better exercise for training those forearms because you're still working on hand grip strength, which is really, really positively correlated with a lot of different benefits, especially in the hand, wrist, and elbow. I used to work at a hand clinic, so they would be they might be a little mad at me if I didn't actually mention that was so good for everything, but it keeps the wrist in a neutral position, so you're not worrying about flexing and extending the wrist here. It stays upright, stacked with that forearm, but you're still learning how to create that strength from that forearm into that hand. Again, it's really, really important. I think this is one of the best exercises you can do if you're like, hey, I want to have really strong forearms because I want to improve my grip, whether or not that's for work or a hobby or something like that. Do carries. It's going to be one of the best things for you. The next one is spinal stability. Very obviously, if you are like rounded forward while you're walking around, like those weights have control. Gravity is winning the fight against you, and we want to make sure we are preventing that. So again, if you are loading a little bit too heavy, a lot of times those shoulders will come forward. Make sure you're loading appropriately so you can keep those shoulders back, shoulder blades squeezed in the back together, so that way you're maintaining a really, really good posture as you're moving forward along that track. The next one's really, really important, but this is more of a long-term benefit. Carries, especially weighted carries, farmers carries, all the ones we just talked about, are really, really important for bone mineral density. Now, if you're my age, you're probably not thinking about bone mineral density that much, but this is something that peaks when you're in your mid-20s if you've been resistance training, and it starts to decline after that. And that's what we call aging. It's really hard to avoid, so make sure that you guys are doing this because that is going to help keep those bones nice and strong, specifically the bones in the spine. We talked about this a little bit last week as well. The vertebrae themselves are what we call spongy bone. So it's kind of a lattice work of bone minerals. So it's not solid all the way through. So it allows us to essentially absorb more forces, which is good. But to keep that lattice work nice and strong, it requires load to continually be putting into that. And when you have weights in both hands, pulling down on those shoulders, it's essentially pulling down on that spine as well. Adding that load, make sure you guys do that. It's so important for all of the bones in the body, and especially like the leg bones as well, your femur, tibias, fibula as well. Make sure you guys are training those because again, those are the ones that are actually moving and producing the force. So those muscles are super active. So it is really, really important for overall bone mineral density. The next one is shoulder strength. We want to make sure we're improving those shoulders here, guys. A lot of the times there's a different progression of soreness with these activities. A lot of times hand strength will usually go out first. That's usually where people are like, oh my gosh, my hands are getting really tired. And then the next one's usually shoulders. That's when people will start to feel, okay, my shoulders are starting to get a little bit sore here from holding those weights and holding those those shoulders kind of want to pull up a little bit to counter that weight effect. And it's pretty demanding. Again, it's simple but demanding, which is why this is one of the best exercises. So making sure we're getting those shoulders nice and strong. One of the next benefits to the carry as well is its low impact. You're walking with this. I don't prescribe this as a running exercise. You already experience several factors more of force into your joints when you are running. So I don't necessarily I don't ever program this or prescribe this for anyone who is doing this with weight, because I think it's about you. When an individual is running, you experience about 8 times your own body weight in forces to actually strike the ground and then propel yourself off to continue that stride. And so if you're adding weight, so even if you add if you add 25 pounds worth of weight, you multiply that by 8, and then you've essentially added an extra 200 pounds of force into your joint. So it goes really, really quickly, and you don't experience quite that 8 times factor when you're walking. I think it's more of 3 to 4, depending on how you walk and how fast you're going. So it's a lot lower. So make sure you're lowering that impact, but getting a little bit more out of it as well. All right, guys, that second to last benefit we'll talk about is the metabolic benefit. This is a full body movement, so making sure the entire body is getting a workout, do some carries. A lot of the times I'll get questions from people and they'll say, hey, I have 2 times to work out this week. What should I do? And you bet I'm going to be programming carries into their program for that 2 times a week if they have more of a slammed week, especially come holidays. People get really busy. So making sure you're effectively working out, challenging a lot of different muscle groups in different ways, using that carry is going to be really, really good for you guys. The next one is actually one of my favorites, and one of the benefits here is that the carry has a lot of benefit for sport and activities of daily living carryover. So that's what that ADL stands for here, guys. The carry is one of the most simple and effective movements we do. That's how we interact with our environment a lot. So when we're looking at all of the other fundamentals, that is going to help us interact with something in our environment. So if something is on the ground, oftentimes we will squat, hinge, or lunge to actually get down to the object, whatever it might be. We have to push or pull to get that object near the body. A lot of times it's pulling. Most of the time we have to then move ourselves. We have to go through that process of actually moving that object from point A to point B, and we have to do so effectively, because if we got hurt every time we carried something, we wouldn't get that far as a society. So this has a ton of carryover into almost all of our daily tasks. I don't know about you guys, but when we used to live in an apartment, we would go up this very steep flight of stairs, and we always used to say 2 trips are for quitters. So when we would go through and we would get our groceries from Fred Meyer or whatever, we would basically just load up as many bags as we could. I would have maybe 5 or 6 bags on each arm, because I'm man, I don't want to go all the way out to the parking lot, because we might be parked on the other side of the lot. It's a decently big apartment complex, so we're we only want to do this once. So I usually send my wife up in front of me, have her take care of the dog so he doesn't scamper underneath me, because I can't see when I'm holding 8 bags, right? And then I just have her get the door with whatever bag she's got. Keep a hand open. It's kind of hard to operate a key when you're holding 8 to 12 bags or whatever. And then we would just do that. A little bit harder if we're doing Costco, because everything comes in boxes. But when you're doing Fred Meyer or something that we can get everything in bags, it actually worked pretty well. And then the carry is going to transfer over into sport quite a bit as well, just because it is going to put such a metabolic demand on you. It does provide a great source of just general conditioning. So making sure you guys are getting that involved is going to be really, really important. Coming up next here, guys, we're going to talk about the different variations and their benefits as well. So the main carry and all of its benefits you're going to see all of these benefits for these secondary movements. So we mentioned earlier the single side carry, overhead carry, offset carry, and rucking. You're going to get most of these benefits minus you're not going to get as much hand and shoulder strength from rucking, but most of these benefits are pretty unilateral across all of these moves. So we want to talk about a little bit of the specific challenges for each of these as well, so you guys know kind of what's different and what's actually happening here. So when we're talking about that single side carry, this adds more of what we call a frontal plane challenge. So that move is going to want to tip you to one side or the other. Essentially, gravity is fighting to pull that weight all the way down to the ground. So what's happening is the opposite side of the body has to engage to essentially keep that spine stabilized. So you're using a lot more of that opposite side, your abdominals, your transverse abdominals, your obliques, and your quadratus lumborum, which we'll usually just refer to as QLs, just because most people don't like remembering what quadratus lumborum is. But all of those muscles have to activate just a little bit extra to help stabilize that spine and essentially keep it from tipping over to that side. And then we've got the overhead carry. Earlier I mentioned here, guys, it raises the center of mass or center of gravity. A lot of times I'll interchange those two things, but I usually say the same thing. Normally our center of mass is located right behind our belly button, about 1 to 2 inches, depending on the person. So what we're looking at is when you are raising a weight above the head, now that center of mass is going to be rising with that weight because it's an average of all of the body segments. So when that is higher up off the ground, this requires that greater stability demand, and the core has to work quite as well. A common mistake I'll see with the overhead carry is people will lean back too much and they'll have kind of that excessive extension. And that's something that if you do struggle with, it is really, really hard to work out of. And so it does take a little bit more of that abdominal demand. So it's really, really good to add in, especially for those who we want to train that excessive extension out of them, because it gets them that practice to do so. Then we've got the offset carry. Adding different weights at different heights creates kind of that rotational force. Again, I'll usually just keep one weight kind of resting on or at the shoulder or in the crook of the elbow. I'll do that with kettlebells quite often. And then I'll have one down to the side because that weight is wanting to pull me down, but that higher weight is also wanting to pull me forward as well. So you're getting kind of this rotational effect on the body, and rotational forces do put a lot of pressure on that spine. So training to move against those is going to be really, really important. As I mentioned earlier with rucking here, guys, long distance and endurance is the most important way, or I should say this is the most effective way in training a carry, but for longer amounts of time. A lot of the times, if you're like walking around a track, a standard 400-meter track, that is a hard carry to do, especially if you're doing weights anything above like 25 pounds. That is going to be a slog. The gyms that we're at right now, we have shorter tracks, so they're about 1/6 of a mile, and those are still pretty tough for most people. So keep that in mind when my clients are like, hey, I want to do this for a longer period of time. I want to get my heart rate up and I want to keep it up. I'll usually recommend something like rucking or wearing a weighted vest. And just a little bit, not too much, just that little bit is going to really, really help improve and put a little bit of distance onto that challenge and improve overall endurance as well. All of those have different benefits here, guys. That single side carry, that overhead carry, offset carry, and rucking. If you guys have any questions about those, make sure to throw them into chat. That'll appear right above my head if you guys are watching this on Twitch, and we can post them in the comments as well when we're posting this on YouTube and when you guys are seeing this on different podcast platforms as well. So make sure you guys do that. That'd be super helpful because I want to make sure I'm talking about all of your questions here. Next thing we're going to be talking about is stabilization here, guys. This is kind of our third talking point as part of that thesis. And we're just going to be going over the importance of stabilization and what we call anti-movement, or what's also referred to as anti-rotation. The carry does two primary things for the body. It's going to mobilize a load, so we're taking something heavy and moving it from point A to point B. Then it is also stabilizing the body during movement to prevent injury. Again, as I said earlier, if we are not able to move that load without hurting ourselves, we would not get very much done. So the body needs to do both of these to essentially get through our everyday tasks and be able to repeat these. When we are loaded here, guys, depending on if we're single side, farmer's carry, offset loading, overhead, every single one of those provides a slightly different demand for that core. And it's really, really important that we learn to stabilize and really fight against that movement. So again, when we mention like the single side, when we're putting all that weight onto one side, the shoulder is going to want to drop. That opposite side core is going to lengthen essentially. There's no longer that stability there. So we have to prevent that movement. That's what kind of that idea of anti-movement comes in. And that anti-movement is actually much better for training the core than we thought. One of the things that we're going to go over next here, guys, is some different pairings for core stabilizations as well. And so this is going to be kind of that final point that's going to make the most amount of sense for you guys. And the reason we want to stabilize is really it comes down to preventing injury. Now we're going to talk about different pairings with core work, and you guys are going to see some pretty standard exercises here. What you're not going to see, however, is things like crunches, side crunches, Russian twists, all those exercises that involve excessive movement of the spine. And the reason is this: we want to train the spine to be stable, not to move. You want those muscles to be strong, to essentially keep everything in line and then move under control. So a lot of the times I won't tell people like, hey, you need to do crunches and sit-ups, because that's essentially constantly moving that spine into extension and flexion, 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 flexion. And then over time, we're just teaching that spine that, oh yeah, we can produce, like you might be able to do like a weighted crunch with a bunch of weight. That's fine. But then that spine is used to curling forward. We don't want to practice that. We don't want to practice that posture under weight. We want to practice good posture under tension, keeping everything in line. So the first thing we'll talk about is that side plank. This is a very, very tough move, but this is going to target the obliques because this is essentially keeping everything upright. You're just going to see that we've got the feet stacked on top of each other. Elbow needs to be right underneath the shoulder. When that elbow is too far out or too far under, that's going to put unneeded stress on that shoulder joint. So make sure you guys aren't doing that. Just holding that right under 90 degrees are your friends. So make sure you guys use them. A lot of the times I will start off side planks and have people do these for usually 20 seconds at a time with a little bit of rest, because you want to make sure you hit both sides, and then usually increasing 5 to 10 seconds every once in a while. Again, you can use that 3 check mark system that we talked about last week, but we'll go into a little bit more of that today as well. Next movement is that plank. You'll see that this targets a lot of different muscles. It's mostly going to target the shoulders and the core, so they've got a lot of stuff highlighted on here. And yes, those muscles are slightly active, but we're mostly focusing on keeping that core tight, and then shoulders, again, right over the elbows here. We like those 90-degree angles. Those are really, really good for you. Again, if that elbow is too far out, a lot of the times that actually is what causes people's mats to kind of like slip around. So if you're somebody who is planking and you're like, why is my mat not staying still? It's usually because you're pushing your weight forward by having your forearms too far forward and not directly underneath, and having all of that pressure go straight down, keeping that mat in place. A really, really good tip for the planks here, guys, is imagine taking that belly button and pulling it into that spine, and that's going to create a really, really strong core. And then really what we're looking for is, if we were to draw a straight line from head, shoulders, hips to heels, we want that to go through all 4 of those main points while we are in that plank. I'll usually start off with 45 to 60 second planks with my clients, with a little bit of rest in between as we're programming this. The next one is what we call a bird dog. We're going to start in that tabletop position here, guys, and big shock, everything's at 90 degrees. So the knees are right underneath the hips, the hands are underneath the shoulders, and again, that belly button pulled up into that spine. That's going to create that nice and strong spine, so it's still neutral even though it's in that horizontal position. And then when we are getting into this, you're going to see this extension. So left arm forward to right arm back. So opposites extend as you're going through, and that way you have a very, very small base of support. This is very, very wobbly, but it's really, really good to learn how to stabilize that low back. You pair all 3 of these with your carries, and you're going to see your lifting improve. You are going to see that strength get better because you are going to learn how to keep that core absolutely solid. You're going to condition those legs, those shoulders, those arms, all of those important joints, and you guys are going to see some really big benefits out of your routine. One thing I didn't mention as well is when you guys are doing the bird dogs, oftentimes I will program these for 30 to 45 seconds for each side, because you want to make sure you're doing both. And then I'll progress it from there as well. All right, we want to talk about movement progression. This one is going to be a little bit different, because normally when we are looking at our classic programming, we're actually looking at this model right here. So it's a sets by reps by weight by rest. This doesn't work all the time because reps isn't necessarily going to be the same. So we want to basically switch out reps for distance. Now, if you have, some gyms will have this, they'll have a length of turf set out, and maybe 1 rep is just going down and back. If you know that, that actually works fantastically, but not all gyms have that. A lot of the gyms I work at actually have indoor tracks, and each of the gyms I work at, the tracks are actually different lengths as well. So depending on how long the track is, we're going to change some of those other variables to make sure that we are making this a little bit more like make sense. So when you guys are doing carries, you're going to basically either progress the weight or the distance. And those are going to be the 2 things. You can use the 3 check method. So if you are going to do, let's say, 3 sets by 1 lap, by 100 pounds by 1 minute of rest. Keep in mind, a 100-pound carry is a really heavy place to start off, especially if you're carrying both of these and just a 50-pound dumbbell in each hand. So keep that in mind. But if you're going to do that 3 sets by 1 lap by whatever weight and have a minute rest in between, again, if you can do this 1, 2, and 3 times all on separate days, then progress that movement. Maybe add an extra set, or maybe increase your distance, or increase your weight, or decrease that rest time. There's lots of different ways you can modify that to make sure you guys are getting that. But really, the biggest 2 things are going to be weight and distance. So distance is going to replace reps here. That's going to be the biggest thing to know. And then you guys are free to progress that on your own. Let's go over a workout update here, guys. It's been a good month so far. Today is the 8th, so we are just past the first full week of November. Our goals here are, remember, we're trying to get 3,200 points for with our MEP system, which is the MyZone heart rate monitor. Really, really fun. That comes out to about 107 points per day. A little bit higher if you don't count weekends, because we don't always get the chance to work on weekends. And then my second goal was to improve 3 lifts. We've made a lot of progress so far. We have 899 points. So that means we're 43 points above our average. And that hasn't even included my workout today, because we'll be doing that after this episode. I have 3 movements ready to progress here, guys. Really, really excited about it. So when I'm looking at that 3-check system, I have 3 checks currently on my deadlift, my power cleans, and my hinge row, or my bent over row. So all 3 of those are going to be ideally going up this week. Super excited about that, but it also might be a little bit dead by the end of this week as well. So I'll keep you guys updated on all of that and make sure you guys are kind of following along. We didn't get any questions this week, so we're not going to go over that. We didn't have any changes in the map either, so very, very excited. We did get some more people. We did get more listeners in some of the states we already have, but we didn't necessarily get any new locations or countries or anything like that. So if you guys are looking at our map here, guys, most of our listeners do come from the United States. So we have most of our listeners in actually Washington State, and we got a few different counties and cities that are listening in from there. So thank you, all my listeners in Washington. I really appreciate you. And then we have more listeners in California, Indiana, Texas, Ohio, Oklahoma, Florida, North Carolina, New Jersey, and Oregon. So again, we got that West Coast covered. Let's try to get some more East Coast and everything in between. When we're looking at international listeners here, guys, we have listeners in Belgium, the UK, Sweden, India, Czech Republic, Spain, and Australia. Now, keep in mind, one thing I have not added to this yet is our listeners from YouTube. That's going to be something I'm adding in as well. There's just a lot of different places to check, but I'm pretty sure we have a few more that are listening in from different places, but you guys just watch this in video form, not on audio form. That's kind of the nice thing about using services on the audio form of this podcast, is that it actually provides a ton of different data that we can use as creators to better curate our content. So really excited about that. But again, we'd love to get every country highlighted here, guys. So let's make sure we're doing that. Share this with a friend, and that would be super appreciated. Today is nice and simple. Again, that's kind of the beauty of the carry here, guys. It's not the most complex movement in the world, but it is an absolute calorie burner. So thank you guys so much for listening in. The best way to help us out currently is to listen or watch these episodes. Please leave comments with questions, feedbacks, and your own experience as well. We want to hear from you guys and how you guys are making yourself healthier humans. You guys can also follow my Instagram as well. That is NAMOS918. I post different story updates with some of the clients that I work with in person, so that if you guys are interested to see how these programs are affecting real people on my side, you guys can check that out as well. Right now, you can find the Healthy Humans podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and Pocket Casts. That's actually one of our most common ones that we have right now is Pocket Casts. That's where a lot of you guys are listening in, so thank you guys so much. This is still a fairly new podcast, so if you guys can't find us, follow me on Twitter and look for the pinned tweets. I want to share fairly regularly AMA episodes or Ask Me Anything episodes, so that way, if you guys have questions, we answer them directly. I will be including questions that relate to each episode's topic, so please send in your questions to me on Twitter or Instagram or the podcast email, which is healthyhumanspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to get more questions from you guys. We want to make sure we are covering everything you guys want to hear. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, make sure you guys check out the description to find all of the different links for socials. It's a lot of different places because we do a lot of different content. So consider just going through and liking more of that. The more support we get means higher production values, more frequent releases, and a larger variety of content as well. So we appreciate all of you guys listening in. Just remember, all information discussed on this podcast does not constitute medical advice, and you should always consult your physician before starting an exercise program. Something I want to end with is this. Whenever I finish a training session, I would always say my 3 rules. Rule number 1 is make sure to move around and stretch. After you finish your workout, movement is medicine. Get that blood flowing so you guys can have a good time. Second, make sure you guys are drinking water, preferably more water than coffee and other libations. And most importantly, make sure you guys have a great rest of your day. We will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for stopping by.